Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the news today discussion for 16th October. First news is about districts most affected by LWE, that is left wing extremism, brought down to 3 from 6. So here we'll understand the concept of left wing extremism, what exactly it is, and what were the measures that were taken by the government that has reduced the number as such. So second news is about Supreme Court allows green crackers in Delhi NCR. So here we'll understand the concept of green crackers and how this decision balances several of the other attributes of maybe right to life and versus livelihood. Then third news is with respect to RBI governor suggested other central banks to promote CBDCs over stable coins. So in this news, we will discuss the concept of central bank digital currencies and how they are superior or better compared to stable coins as per the RBI governor, and we'll also understand their key underlying concepts. Then in the fourth news, we'll talk about the CACP highlights unbalanced fertilizer subsidies. So this has a very profound impact on the agricultural productivity. So we'll also understand the subsidy regime in India and the problems arising out of it. In the last news, we'll talk about decline of Pax Americana. So in today's Hindu or Indian Express, Dr. Shashi Tharoor has written an article that talks about the decline of the American system that had was prevailing in the post-Cold War order. So we'll talk about what were the reasons that led to this crisis and what is going to be the system that is going to occupy here. Then we have some quick updates, and in the places in news, we are going to talk about Kyrgyzstan. So the first news is district most affected by Naxalism brought down to 3 from 6, and this is something from General Studies paper 3 internal security, and this can be considered as a topic that is majorly from the perspective of mains, even though some of the things that we discuss can also be asked as part of the prelims paper as well. So if you look at the news, now this number is not that important, but what is important is that only 3 districts are there which are mostly affected by left-wing extremism, and all of these districts are in Chhattisgarh, and these districts are Bijapur, Sukma and Narayanpur. The number of LWE affected district has also been further down to just 11 from 18 that was there in the last year. In fact, in the 2013 era, the number of LWE affected areas were around or more than 100 districts were affected, right? And if you look at several states where LWE extremism was prevailing, including Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, most of these areas have generally been considered as Naxal-free areas, right? So very few areas remain which has this thing. And in fact, you may be aware that government or Ministry of Home Affairs has provided this target of eliminating LWE from India in 2026. So all of this can be considered as way for India to achieve its target of removing Naxalism or eradicating the left-wing extremism by 2026. But we should also pause and ask ourselves, what exactly is the idea behind left-wing extremism? And why does it matter, right? So do we need to not understand? Yes, we should definitely understand the concept of left-wing extremism. So first thing that it's very clear that it is a left thing. So in the political ideology or in the political philosophy part, there are 2 streams of thought. One characterized by conservatism and the other one is determined by radicalism, or in terms of some changes or revolutionary changes in the system. So there are conservatism, which seeks to promote or tends to conserve the underlying socio-economic condition, right? Then you have and this is generally considered as right. So when we say that right-wing politics, it seeks to preserve the status quo, right? So it is about status quo, but it talks about certain reforms that is incremental in nature. It does not talk about complete change of the status quo. Then there is revisionary approach that is basically called as, or revision approach, which talks about changing the status quo. So this is anti-status quo, and this is generally considered as left. So why it is considered as left? Because it is generally, when we talk about our hand, right hand is considered to be dominant and left hand is considered to be less dominant. So the left ideology is to empower the people who were historically not empowered. So it is essentially about empowering those they were marginalized. So that is about left ideology, and it is majorly driven by the ideas of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, etc. So left ideology, it is basically about empowering the poor, empowering the Dalits, empowering those people who have historically been marginalized. Now, what is the problem? It is, in fact, a good approach. It's a good ideology, but the approach here is extremism. So extremism essentially means that you are taking certain brutal action, violent means to achieve your goal, right? So here it is based on violence, okay? Now, the left-wing extremism in India is very much influenced by what is called as Maoist ideology. Maoist ideology is based on the name of Mao Zedong, who was a Chinese revolutionary, and also later he became the chairman of the Communist Party of China. And here he tend to modify the Marxist approach, right? So this part is important because we need to understand what is the way in which India or the Indian Naxalites have been using Maoist ideology. So Maoism says, or it modifies the Marxist idea. So as per Karl Marx, the primary contradiction was with the workers on one hand and the industrialist on the other hand. And these contradictions were generally seen in the advanced industrial societies. But in countries like India or in China, industries were not that prominent, they were not that much grown. In fact, in these areas, majorly, it was agriculture that was predominant. So here the contradiction was majorly with two landowners or zamindars on one hand versus the peasants on the other hand, or the landless laborers on the other hand. So Mao instigated the peasants to revolt against the landowners and take their lands so that it will lead to equality. So the idea is to gain equality, but Mao says that the landowners will not present their land voluntarily. Therefore, the peasants have to indulge into violence. And this is what he says, that the revolution happens through a barrel of gun, and violence is the midwife of change, right? So this is what the Indian LWE revolutionaries have essentially based their ideology on, and the revolution started in Naxalbari region in West Bengal. That is why it is called Naxalite movement, okay? So if you look at the origin of this, it originated from the Naxalbari movement of 1967 in West Bengal. In fact, the leaders of this revolution was Charu Mazumdar and Mr. Sanyal, right? So they started this movement, and it was based on the ideology of socio-economic equality. So it wanted to reduce the socio-economic inequality or equality, and it was driven by Maoist principle, which means that there was a fundamental contradiction between the rich and the poor. So rich were characterized by those who have land, and poor were characterized by those who were denied of land or any other opportunities, right? And it has historically impacted those areas in India which were remote, that were not accessible from the mainstream India, which did not have public infrastructure, and they were underdeveloped, and mostly they were tribal dominated areas. So if you look at the red corridor, so let me know what exactly is the meaning of red corridor, which states were earlier considered to be red corridor. So in these red corridor, if you analyze, they were mostly remote areas, and they were underdeveloped areas, and they were areas that were tribal dominated. So in those areas, the ideology of Maoism, ideology of Naxalism started to penetrate. So Maoism, when applied in Indian context, was called as Naxalism. So in response to that, government from time since its inception had taken various steps. In fact, right in 1967, government started or launched a very important law, that was UAPA 1967, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967. After that, also government took several security related measures, development related measures, but it was seeing very limited success. So after 2014, things started to change when government started to combine several aspects of challenges with respect to the management of Naxalism, right? Or manage or eradication of Naxalism. And the three pillars of this was in terms of governance, security, and ensuring that there is infrastructure. So development, governance, and security. So these were the three pillars on which the policy of India was very much successful in eradicating LWE to a large extent. And if you look at some of the measures that the government took, so in this, the most important one would be two initiatives. One is the Samadhan Doctrine, and the other one is a National Action Plan on and Policy of 2015. So National Action Plan and Policy essentially is a security-oriented policy. So what it did was it tried to correct some of the historical mistakes in the past with respect to leadership initiative and in terms of strategic areas. So for this, it targeted the top leaders of Maoism, of the Naxalism, and it ensured that the ideological support was removed. Then it not only targeted the leaders, but it also targeted OGW, that is the overground workers. Overground workers were those, they were providing intelligence support and some sort of logistical support to these leaders. Then it also provided counter ideology, right? And finances. It curbed the finances. It strengthened the center state coordination. As you all know, that law and order is a state subject, but here there was so much problem because the Maoist would go from one state to the other state, and then there would be problem with respect to coordination of center and state. Therefore, this policy ensured that there is a dedicated way in which the Central Armed Police Forces, CRPF, would go and coordinate among these different states, right? So there was a dedicated way in which center-state coordination would be conducted. So this was essentially about security approach, security-centric approach. The second, the Samadhan Doctrine can be considered as the flagship initiative against the LWE. And again, this is a combination of three pillars. It is a combination of security on one hand, governance on the other hand, and development on the other hand, right? Because ultimately, in order for ensuring something, to eradicate the support for LWE, it is very essential that the underlying condition that promotes the idea of LWE is removed, right? It's not necessary to just indulge in security-centric operations, but it is also important to indulge into governance, good governance, indulge in or ensure that there is development that is being reached to all the sectors of the population, right? So for this, Samadhan Doctrine was launched in 2017, and here all these letters have a significant meaning, right? So for example, S stands for smart leadership. So here this would ensure that the leadership, there is some sort of convergence of action, and there is basically command and control center, and they would be unified in their action. So there would be some sort of jointness in action, just like our army works. So there was basically a hierarchy was created, and it was ensured that a single operation was undertaken and it was executed perfectly. Then there was aggressive operations. Operations were created and it was monitored very effectively, and it would not be stopped unless the goal was achieved. Third, the M stands for motivation. So motivation was also provided, some sort of things were provided so that they would be motivated to take actions. Then actionable intelligence was provided. So earlier, the security forces would act without any intelligence and in random manner. So now actionable intelligence was provided. So in light of that, the actions became more targeted, more specific, right? After that, you also have D stands for digital infrastructure, where or dashboard, where there was KPIs or key performance indicators were given, and and everything was monitored very effectively. So you can say that from SAME was essentially about the security centric operation, and the rest of them could be considered as governance initiative, right? For example, AN would be to remove, there was some element related to reducing the access to finances, right? So it was a combination of both, or in fact, combination of security, governance, and development. Now you tell me, what does D, H, and N stands for with respect to Samadhan? Very important. Then the next approach was community engagement. So one of the reason why LWE continued to persist in the country was because community did not have any alternative ideology to counter LWE. So it was very essential that the government would interact with the community, would talk about the developmental plans, and especially engage with the community at large. And this was because of the community engagement program, where civic action program were built to, and the major impact here was, a thrust was to build trust in the government. Then there was rehabilitation. Those who were already or had joined Maoism or Naxalism, and they wanted to get back to the mainstream, because they could have joined just because of, or in terms of desperation, or because they did not have some sort of land, or maybe they were very poor. So for those people, there was rehabilitation initiative also done. So surrender cum rehabilitation for ex-Naxalite was also done. In fact, recently a very senior Naxal leader has also surrendered. Now, can you name that leader in the comment section? Then with respect to developmental initiative, there were three major pillars. First was with respect to financial inclusion, where banks, ATMs, business correspondents were provided in the affected area. This would ensure that the people had some sort of public digital infrastructure or some sort of financial infrastructure that would improve their conditioning. Second, government also provided with skill and education, including construction and development of ITIs, skill sector, and EMRS school, which is Eklavya Model Residential School. As we have discussed, most of the LWE affected areas are those which primarily lie in the tribal belts, or which are underdeveloped, or which are essentially areas which are not very well connected. So for this, for tribal areas, we know that the Eklavya Model Residential Schools were launched. Then you also have Dharti Aba Abhiyan, which was for personal amenities and local welfare. In fact, you can also add some other initiative like Adi Karm Yogi initiative, or you can also add the aspirational district program that took into consideration the 112 most so-called backward districts of the country. So instead of focusing on the state-based approach, it was focusing on the district-based approach, and it was focusing on convergence, collaboration, and competition, right? So we can talk about some of the developmental measures, and we can talk about some of the specific measures, right? Then we all know that we already have measures like 5th schedule and 6th schedule, which politically empower the people who are residing in the tribal and other areas, right? So we can talk about all these measures, which ultimately now has helped India address this problem to a large extent, and it is very likely that we are going to meet the target of elimination of Naxalism by 2026. If you look at the PYQs, every 1 or 2 years, UPSC asks a question on Naxalism or left-wing extremism. And these questions are generally very generic in nature. They are not very specific. So you need to know the causes of people who are joining LWE. You need to know about the ideology. You need to know about these measures that the government has undertaken and their efficacy. So in light of this, UPSC had asked a similar question in 2025, which reads as follows. So the government of India recently stated that the left-wing extremism will be eliminated by 2026. The question was, what do you understand by LWE and how are people affected by it? What measures have been taken by the government to eliminate LWE? So we, in the topic discussion, we have already covered the idea of LWE and we have covered what measures the government has taken. Now you tell me what are the ways how people are affected by LWE. The next topic is Supreme Court allows limited use of green crackers in Delhi NCR. And this topic can be considered to be useful for GS paper 2 polity and GS 3 environment. Now why this is in news? Because earlier Supreme Court had banned the use of all forms of crackers because it had led to several air pollution, and not just air pollution but also noise pollution, right? But recently Supreme Court has in a way gone away from its earlier direction and have given a recent direction or a revised direction. So let's take a look at the direction that the Supreme Court has given and what are basically the significance of that direction. So first, usage is strictly limited to specific days and time slots. So as per this direction, it is limited to from 18th October to 20th October. And the time slot is that it is, there's two time slot, one in the morning and then in the evening or in the night from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So if you cannot have or use the crackers beyond that time slot and beyond these days. Then only NEERI approved crackers can be sold through authorized outlet. Now, NEERI is National Engineering so National Institute of National Environment Engineering Research Institute. Okay, so it is an initiative of CSIR and it is under Ministry of Science and Technology, right? So it provides for several environment related guidance to the government, especially with respect to water management, etc. And it also provides for guidance with respect to green crackers, right? So only those crackers which are approved by NEERI, they will be allowed to sold and only through authorized dealer. It will not be sold through e-commerce platforms such as Blinkit, right? So you will not be able to get it delivered through your Blinkit apps. So crackers containing banned chemicals or sold via e-commerce platform remain prohibited. Then CPCB, that is Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, will monitor the air quality to assess the impact of this temporary relaxation. Now, if you look at the significance of this, first thing is that we know that Supreme Court generally, if you look at the judgments of Supreme Court, they are more or less, they are to balance certain key ideas, right? Because we know that India is a very diverse country and different people have different interests and stakes. So one decision which can be beneficial for a very large group of people can also be detrimental for a other group of people. So it is something that Supreme Court does from time to time, whether it was about the stray dogs event or maybe it was for any other event. Supreme Court generally takes a very balancing approach, right? So first here, in terms of the pragmatic balance, it balances the couple of things. First, with respect to right to clean environment. Right to clean environment is part of Article 21 versus right to livelihood. Livelihood of those people who are involved in the firecracker industry. So firecracker industry has several people employed and they generally work for a single purpose of producing crackers, right? So if they are not given the choice or if they are not given rehabilitated, then it will definitely be very much problematic for those people. So we need to ensure that there is some sort of balance. So right to livelihood. Then again, right tradition versus modernity. So even though it is in the modern time, we see that it is about not about following the religious tenets, but tradition should also be respected, because celebration like this is part of our culture and and therefore it is this kind of development or this decision is going to improve or ensure that our tradition is not compromised. At the same time, it also ensure that we are following a modern way of living, right? Right, so these can be some of the ways where we can say that how Supreme Court is balancing several goals at the same time. Then it is a pilot for evidence-based policy making. Now, policy making essentially is a domain of the executive or even legislature, right? But why Supreme Court is entering into this domain? Supreme Court is entering into its domain because we know that Supreme Court is the custodian of rights. And here it is possible that government will be under tremendous pressure to act under all these consideration, and it may be succumbing to political pressure to take some step. Therefore, judiciary would enter into some of the area to ensure that there is proper checks and balances and the rights of the people are not violated, right? So in this, what is happening is this: instead of completely banning the crackers, Supreme Court has taken a very nuanced approach. It has regulated it. Now, we have already discussed that the CPCB will be monitoring the level of pollution as well. So if the pollution level is significantly rising, it means that the balance is very much favored against the right to clean environment. So Supreme Court will take some remedial measures. If the pollution level does not increase significantly, then we can say that it is a balanced approach, or it measures is fine. So instead of banning something, maybe what we can do is we can regulate it, because when we ban something, it very likely happens that the usage goes underground and the implementation parts becomes very difficult. The monitoring part becomes very difficult. So this is a very nuanced approach which will help us in testing whether the evidence-based policy making in India can be successful or not, right? So this can be the significance of this decision. Let's now talk about green crackers, which can be asked as part of the prelims examination. So first of all, who develops this? It is developed by CSIR, NEERI. Now tell me, where is NEERI located? So green crackers are designed to reduce environmental impact compared to the traditional fireworks. So they are not entirely pollution free. So if in the MCQ, they say the question comes that green crackers do not pollute or do not create any sort of air pollution, that would be wrong. So it's not that they do not create pollution, but they cut the pollution. So they cut particulate matters emission by at least 30%. So it can be 30% or more than 30%, depending on the type of the green cracker, right? And it exclude harmful chemicals such as barium nitrate, arsenic, lithium, and mercury. So these are the very harmful chemicals that create not just air pollution, but they can also be lead to water pollution and other aspects. So they were first introduced. These green cracker measure was introduced in a very important case called Arjun Gopal versus Union of India 2018 judgment. So in this judgment, Supreme Court banned the usage of conventional crackers in Delhi, right? But this was problematic because it was not able to, the government was not able to implement it effectively. So even though it was legally operational, but it was not effectively implemented, right? So NGT again had approached Supreme Court and sought some more clarification in this. And then there were petitions filed by various lobbies of the industry that wanted some sort of relaxation. So in a way, this rule or this judgment in a way tries to balance all of this, as we have discussed. Now let's talk about the types of green crackers. So there are three types of green crackers. First is SWAS, that is safe water and air releases. So it emits or releases very fine water droplets that absorb dust. Second is SAFAL, that is safe minimal aluminum, contain a safe amount of aluminum and are quieter. So they are very crucial for reducing the noise pollution. So generally the crackers are above 120 decibel when they are erupted or when they are released. But here this really quiets it down. Then the third one is STAR, that is safe thermite cracker, which is free of potassium nitrate and sulfur and emits minimal smoke. So you can remember them through this keyword, that when there is W in the cracker or in the name, then it refers to SWAS or water. So W would stands to water. Sulfur, here you have Al, that is refers to aluminium. Then you have STAR, which basically corresponds to thermite, right? So maybe this can be some way in which you can recall in the PYQ or in the MCQ whenever they come in the examination. If you look at the question that UPSC asked, so UPSC asked this question: does the right to clean environment entail legal regulation on burning crackers during Diwali, right? Discussed in the light of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution and judgments of the Apex Court in this regard. So here you can mention Arjun Gopal case, and you can also mention the petition that was filed in 2015 by a gentleman that sought the banning of firecrackers in the entire country, right? So here you can talk about how, so you can talk about the significance of the decision, right? And you can further write it down. Third topic is RBI governor has suggested other central banks to promote CBDCs over the stable coin. And this is something that can be considered as part of GS paper 3 economy. And this suggestion comes in the backdrop of the fact that recent global development of the Genius Act of US, and there's a Digital Asset Basic Act bill of South Korea. In fact, couple of days back, Honorable Finance Minister also mentioned the fact that perhaps we need to relook into the stable coin mechanism, because we don't want to miss the ship on this, right? So we need to perhaps understand the stable coin mechanism more in order for us to fully appreciate or implement it in the country. So in this, through this statement, RBI governor has sought to reposition its view on stable coin and CBDCs, right? So let's take a look into what exactly are CBDCs and stablecoin. CBDC essentially means there is the digital currency released by the central bank. So central bank, all the countries have central bank which have some similar type of function, and these similar type of function can be with respect to controlling the money supply, inflation, and managing the external sector, etc. There can be function, but one function is common to all the central bank is supply of money, right? Money supply. So in light of this, the RBI governor has said that perhaps we should consider more CBDCs as compared to stable coins. So CBDCs are what? New form of money that exist only in the digital form. So generally we have printed money or monies which are in the form of cash, right? So these money are, they have couple of pros, such as that they are easily transactable, and they're also very convenient. But at the same time, we know that there can be fake currencies are there. We also know that it may lead to a generation of money laundering, etc. So there are certain pros, but there are cons as well. On top of that, it is also said that the printing cost alone is also a significant cost. So by promoting digital currency, the government can save significant amount of cash, right? Then instead of printing money, the central bank issues widely accessible digital coins so that digital transaction and transfers become simple. With respect to what is stable coin, so you can consider that CBDC is one which is released by the central bank, and stable coin is one which is released by private operators, but they are backed by some another assets. For example, mostly they are pegged to US dollar or some other currencies, right? Now, why does CBDC need to be preferred over stablecoin? What arguments that the RBI governor gave in this regard? So first is with respect to backing, which makes it more safer. So CBDCs are considered legal tender. They are considered as fiat currencies. Fiat means that is backed by the sovereign, right? So they are recognized and accepted by the government for every transaction, right? Then CBDCs operate within a regulatory framework. It can be regulated, ensuring consumer protection, unlike many stable coins which lack regulatory oversight. So even though stable coins are pegged to dollar or some currency, but still they are outside the regulatory mechanism. Then cross-border payment can be done very efficiently, right? CBDCs can simplify and speed up. It can both simplify and speed up international trade payments. It can reduce reliance on intermediaries like SWIFT, okay? Then other benefits include better integration with monetary policy, promotes inclusive and low cost public payment system, etc. So these are some of the benefits that CBDCs have over the stable coins. So with respect to CBDCs in India, what exactly is the status here? So in India, we call it digital rupee. You may have seen the sign as well. It is like this, E, right? So this is what the sign looks like for the digital or e-rupee. It is issued, of course, by the RBI in digital form, and it offers features which are very similar to the physical cash, like convenience of use, guarantee of RBI, finality of settlement. It is stored in the user's digital wallet and can be used to receive or send money and or make payment of transaction, just like, so it is person to person or person to merchant. Then the RBI is currently conducting two pilots of two types of CBDCs, that are retail and wholesale. So retail is available to the general public via digital assets, smartphone apps, etc. So several banks like SBI, Axis Bank have their own system where this can be done, but the penetration continues to be very weak as of now. Then wholesale CBDCs are used among banks and other licensed financial institutions for interbank payment and securities. So why they are wholesale? Because it is done in bulk, and retail means it is generally not done in bulk, but they are of significantly smaller amounts, right? So this is all about the news on CBDCs. Next news is on CACP highlights imbalanced fertilizer subsidies undermining yields and soil health. And this topic can be considered to be part of General Studies Paper 3, Agriculture or Economy. And why this was in news? Because CACP, that is Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices, has recently released a report called Price Policy for Rabi Crops Marketing Season, where it highlighted some of the issues related to fertilizer imbalance in the country, right? So we need to understand this part very well, because agriculture as such in India is very significant for the development of the country, because it provides for around 50% of the employment in the country, and most the problems with respect to food security, nutritional security can be addressed if our agriculture sector is working properly. So this becomes very important. So first of all, we need to understand that what exactly is the correct combination of fertilizer, correct ratio. So in general, there are three types of fertilizers that are used. Nitrogen. A lot of people have confusion here, P and K. So P stands for phosphorus and K for potassium, okay, NPK. So do not be confused here. And what is the ideal ratio? So they cannot be used in all the forms. The ideal ratio is 4, 2 and 1, okay. And generally nitrogen is good for the roots and for the plant, for the stems and leaves. But phosphorus has other purpose, that it is good for the overall development and for the overall growth. Potassium has another purpose. So all the fertilizers have their different usage. But if you look at the actual usage of the fertilizer, it is very much skewed in the favor of nitrogenous fertilizer. And this number becomes like around 9.7, this becomes 3.5 or 3.8, and then this is 1, right? So this number, if you look at it, it is heavily skewed towards nitrogenous fertilizers. and around 90% of the nitrogenous fertilizer is provided through urea. Okay, so this is the fertilizer imbalance that the report is talking about. So what is the problem with respect to this imbalance? Imbalance means that just like we need a balanced diet for the proper growth and development, plants and agriculture also requires it requires proper amount of fertilizer for proper growth and development. So here we see that there is consumption of nitrogen in excessive quantity, but phosphorus and potassium are not given in proper amount. So therefore it is very essential that we understand the consequences of the imbalance of the fertilizer. So the first consequence that the report flags is that the fertilizers are not providing sufficient response. So there is decreasing fertilizer response, which means that food grain production per kg of NPK has fallen from 12 kg to just 3 kg in 2020. So it is a significant drop, which means that we are not effectively utilizing the fertilizer process or the thing. Then there is impact of the subsidy structure is that overuse of urea due to subsidies has caused nutrient imbalances and lopsided. So it has also reduced the soil fertility as well. And because of that, there is decline in the productivity of the farms, right? So this has a severe impact in terms of the farm productivity, and farm productivity will also have severe impact with respect to food safety and food security in the country, and also with respect to the income security with respect to the farmers. Then uneven fertilizer usage in some states and districts per hectare use is higher than required quantity, while in other use the use is very low. So the problem again with respect to this is that there is no balanced usage per in all some of the districts there is excess usage, and in some district it is used in very less quantity. Then the problem here is that there is also dependent on imports of both raw materials and fertilizer, particularly the urea fertilizer. About 30% of demand is met through imports. So our import bill is substantially increased because we are not able to use the fertilizer in a balanced manner. So these can be considered as some of the key issues that are highlighted by the CACP report. So if CACP has provided some problems, it has also provided some solution. So what solution does CACP provides? First is that phased urea price increase. So if you increase the price of some product, definitely its demand will decline. So as we know that the usage of urea is very high compared to the other components of fertilizer, so definitely we need to increase the prices to ensure that the urea is not misused or misutilized. So use subsidy savings to support P and K fertilizers. Second, promote integrated nutrient management, which means that not only we should use chemical fertilizer, but we should also use biofertilizer, we should use organic manure. So this is what is called as integrated, which means that we are integrating not just the chemical fertilizer, but also the organic manure. In fact, there's a initiative called Gobardhan. Strengthening soil testing. So every soil requires different kind of combination of fertilizer. So there cannot be a generic way in which fertilizer can be introduced in any particular soil or any particular area. So for this, it is very essential that we properly test the soil and understand the requirement that it has. So for this, we need to upgrade the labs which can go and take the samples of the soil and recommend the usage. Then install modern equipment, train staff for real-time soil analysis and advisory service. In fact, you may have heard about neem-coated urea, you may have heard about soil health cards. So all these can be done here, right? Yeah, so some of the measures which have already been taken to address the fertilizer related issues are, first is nutrient-based subsidy NBS scheme. Under this scheme, majorly P and K fertilizers are promoted. Right. Second, PM program for restoration, awareness generation, nourishment and amelioration of mother run, that is called PM Pranam. Third, soil health card, neem coated urea, promotion of nano fertilizer. If you look at the PYQ from this topic, This is a slightly generic one, but it will cover the fertilizer based subsidy as well. So here the question is, what are the different types of agricultural subsidies given to farmers at national and at the state level? Critically analyze the agriculture subsidies regime with reference to the distortions created by it. So the types of subsidies that are provided to the farmers can be considered in terms of the input subsidies, then there are price subsidies, then there are other subsidies as well, right? You can categorize it under various heads and then you can talk about them. Then more importantly, what are the impact of these subsidies? So on one hand, they definitely help the farmers, right? Because they add to some of the developmental aspects, right? They also help them because agriculture is a very highly risky activity. But on the other hand, it distorts the market. It also ensure that it also has a very negative impact as far as environment is concerned, right? So these can be some of the ways through which agricultural subsidy is harming or creating distortions, right? And what can be the measures that could be done? Should it be completely remove the subsidies, or should we have a middle path, right? So what should be this approach that we can approach here or use here? Now the next topic is very interesting. Decline of Pax Americana. So this topic or this article or this news or analysis is primarily based on an article that Dr. Shashi Tharoor wrote in today's Indian Express paper. So in this article, we'll understand what is the basic approach, or what was the basic approach of United States after the end of World War II, and how the leadership that US once had is now going away, and what is going to replace that. So a lot of people say that China is going to replace US. So what kind of leader would China be, and what are some of the issues that can arise from that? So this of course is part of GS paper 2 international relations. So if you look at Pax Americana, so Pax Americana essentially means that the global order established after World War II. So there was a time where there was called Pax Britannica. So Pax Britannica was a time after the Industrial Revolution where the Britishers had a huge hegemony because they had huge control on the supply or on the trade routes, and they used the benefits, or they colonized a lot of countries, and they were using that proceeds to further enriching itself. So after World War II, we know that the economy, especially Europe, was devastated, and the primary beneficiary of World War II was US, right? So this phase or this phenomena after the supremacy or hegemony of US was called as, or is called as, Pax Americana. Now this part is going through significant transformation, and it is showing some signs of crack or strain, right? Now, historically, US has championed liberal democracy, okay, and human rights. So in terms of political ways or politically, it has championed liberal democracy. Then in terms of economics, it has promoted open markets, because if the markets were not open, then that was one of the reasons for countries going for war, right? Because it is very, very important that the reason for countries going to war should be curtailed, and open markets, even though it may appear as an economic move, but it was largely a strategic and a very important political move, right? So open market that would make sure that countries that were best suited to produce something would produce and trade freely, and multilateral cooperation. For this, US was very seminal in the creation of United Nations. Earlier also, US was very instrumental in the creation of League of Nations, but League of Nations could not succeed because it was paralyzed by the action of the European countries. But then US was very much active in the multilateral cooperation via the United Nations. The major aspect was on two things: security and prosperity, right? Security, ensuring that there is no the country, that it provides or for some sort of collective security. In the European system, US was primarily responsible for NATO, where it guaranteed the safety and security of the European countries, primarily vis-a-vis Russia or Soviet Union, because it was the heights of the Cold War era. and it also facilitated the economic growth because the countries in the Europe and especially in the Asia could rely on US. Therefore, they would focus more on geoeconomics and less on geopolitics. So this was so their defense spending was very less compared to the spending on public infrastructure, healthcare, etc. So this was a major way through which US was promoting the global order. But the recent developments indicate that now we are shifting from this model and there is a leadership vacuum because US apparently is no longer interested in this global order where it is supporting both security and prosperity. So if you look at some of the decline, so it's not that Pax America is on decline from the advent of the Donald Trump presidency. In fact, it has been under decline or strain for a significant past as well. So in the past, US involved itself in Vietnam War and in the Middle East and in the financial economic crisis of 2008, it has undermined the credibility of US. In fact, several covert and overt operations that US had conducted also signifies that US says one thing on the table or on groupings and does something different when it comes to the actual implementation. But when it comes to the current scenario, this crisis is exacerbated or it is coming to a complete problem because of policy shift. So the policy shift is very much profound under President Donald Trump, which under his second term particularly has gone to this America First or MAGA principle, that is Make America Great Again approach, which in a way is about aggressive trade policies, sanctions, secondary sanctions. Along with that, there is added insults as well. It has furthered US influence because it is primarily concerned with its own burden. It is no longer interested in ensuring that the entire structure is working fine. Then the second important thing is that it has single-handedly weakened the multilateral cooperation and institutions. US had withdrawn from international agreements such as Paris Agreement, and it has withdrawn from institutes like UNESCO, WHO, etc. It has also diminished its soft power. Right? So these are some of the ways in which we can say that US hegemony is on decline because US essentially is now on or looking inwards, more outwards. So it is looking more inwards. It is in a way going for an isolationist policy that earlier US would follow. So it's not something that US, it's a very new thing, but it was something that was sustaining the global order since 1945, and particularly it got strengthened after 1991, after the end of Cold War. But this global order is now coming in a way to an end or decline. And to fill this gap, a lot of people, a lot of analysts has suggested that perhaps China can be the one that would be able to fill this gap, primarily because China is leveraging the US retreat and it is positioning itself as the protector or defender of multilateralism, whether it is the SCO Tianjin Declaration or whether it is through the Belts and Road Initiative. China is positioning itself as an alternative to US. In fact, it is the largest trading partner for over 100 countries. So you can see that there is significant economic dependence of China with respect to other countries. But more importantly, China is also has severe the resources, especially the rare earth minerals, are significant present in China. But at the same time, there are certain issues as well. China is going for a very assertive foreign policy in the South China Sea. You may have heard about the recent problem with Philippines in the Scarborough Shoal, and it is also going down heavily on human rights concerns, especially in all these areas, Tibet areas, and then this problem with debt diplomacy as a result of the Belt and Road Initiative. Then it limits its soft power and global acceptability. In fact, if you look at the approach of India, so India has often flagged that China is going soft with, or China has its nexus with Pakistan, and in a way it is allowing, or it is using Pakistan to do its dirty work, right? So maybe we can, these are some of the concerns that arise because of this. Now, what can be some of the solution? Because obviously China is not acceptable to every stakeholders. So what can else be the way forward? So the decline of this Pax Americana or the dominance of US may lead to a more fragmented world order that can be called as Pax Multipolaris, and offers opportunities for nations like middle power like India, Japan, Germany to emerge as responsible global actors, shaping a more inclusive and equitable international system. So in terms of the opportunities for India, India is pursuing what is called as strategic autonomy, aiming to fill the leadership vacuum through platforms like BRICS. Then it is by diversifying economic partnership, attracting investment, and advocating global reforms, India can balance relations with major powers while advancing the interest of global south. But it remains to be seen to what extent India can act as a responsible and effective global player, because there are several headwinds, right? And recently Donald Trump is doing he was very much instrumental in the recent peace deal with Israel and Hamas. So again, that is something shows that maybe US is not completely retreating, right? So this is something that we need to continuously watch and then understand what could be the implication of this on India's national interest. From the PYQs, you can take a look at this question: with the waning of globalization, post-Cold War order is becoming a site of sovereign nationalism. Elucidate. So you have to explain all these things. What was the reason of waning of globalization, right? And how the post-Cold War is becoming a site of sovereign nationalism. What could be the impact of it? What can be the way ahead because of that? In the places in news, we have Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan, why it was in news? Because India and the Kyrgyz Republic has agreed to strengthen cooperation on counter-terrorism and regional security. So this is one of the key concerns of both India and most of the Central Asian republics, because in the Central Asian republics, there are several groups which are indulge in organized crime, and they are destabilizing the regional stability. So under the RATS framework, the Regional Anti-Terrorist Squad or system, which is under SCO, countries like India and Central Asia, they also cooperate, and this is also done at the bilateral level. Now, if you look at the political features, we know that Kyrgyzstan is located in Central Asia. Its capital is Bishkek, and its bordering countries are Kazakhstan towards the north, then China, and China is here, and then Tajikistan. Tajikistan is here towards the south, and then you have Uzbekistan towards the east. So Kyrgyzstan, along with the other Central Asian republics, was part of USSR, and it got independent in 1991, right? In terms of the geographical feature, it has some of the major mountain ranges are Tian Shan, etc., LA, Trans LA, etc. Then the highest point is Victory Peak, and the major rivers are Narin, Chu, Sir Darya. The major lakes are Lake Yesik, right? Let's talk about the quick updates. First news is with respect to UN Human Rights Council. So India was elected unopposed to UN Human Rights Council for the 7th time, a very significant achievement. And India is elected for a 3-year term starting from the next year. So this is all about the recent development. So we need to understand what exactly is UN Human Rights Council. It was established in 2006 by the General Assembly by replacing the Commission on Human Rights. Now, can you tell me why this replacement happened? It is an intergovernmental body within the United States. And what is the purpose? The purpose is to promote and protect the human rights globally, right? And it has 47 members. They are elected annually by the UN General Assembly, and they serve 3 years, right? 3-year terms, just like India is going to serve a 3-year term, right? So this is all about UN Human Rights Council. The second one is Samudra Shakti exercise. Now this is important because sometimes UPSC can ask about exercises in news. It can be asked as match the following or matching the pairs. So this is associated with Indonesia. So that is what is important from this. Otherwise, not more other things are not important. Yes, it was commenced in Visakhapatnam, and it has two phases, harbor phase and sea phase. But what is important is, you know, with which country India has done this exercise, that is Indonesia. That is what is important. Third is India-Canada relations. We know that couple of years back, the relationship between India and Canada had declined because the former Canadian President, Mr. Justin Trudeau, had alleged Indian hand in the assassination of a Canadian citizen that was of Sikh origin or Indian origin, right? So following that, India had also alleged some counter allegation, and then relationships completely was deteriorated, or and then it was gradually it started to develop following the ouster of the Justin Trudeau government. So recently, India and Canada had agreed on a new roadmap for the relationship once after the talks between their foreign ministers, right? So what are the key highlights? The key highlights are: first, to re-establish the Canada-India ministerial energy dialogue. Second is promote two-way trade for LNG and LPG for an investment in the oil and gas exploration and production sector, including clean technologies. Then collaborate on sustainable low carbon fuels and technologies, and these can be green fuel or biofuel, CCUS, and electric mobility. Emphasis on research partnership in emerging technologies such as AI, cybersecurity, and fintech. So these are important, but we must understand why Canada matters for India. So Canada is important because it is part of G7. It is part of the Five Eyes Alliance, right? So it has significant presence in the Western world, right? And India cannot, or India definitely have a cordial relationship with such countries, because India, the world is currently in flux, and we know that we cannot be relying on any particular country. So it is important that India has, or India manages to have good relationship with these countries as well, with middle power as well, right? Now you tell me which countries are part of Five Eyes Alliance. IUCN Species Survival Commission, SSC. So why this was in news? Because India's renowned wildlife conservationist Vivek Menon was elected as the new chairman of the IUCN SSC, that is Species Survival Commission, for the year, or for the period to from 2025 to 2029. So with respect to IUCN SSC, what exactly it is? It was established in 1949. It is a science-based network of more than 10,000 volunteer experts from almost every country of the world. And what exactly is their function or role? They provide information to IUCN on biodiversity conservation, on inherent value of the species, their role in ecosystem health and functioning, that is niche, etc. Right? So this is what IUCN CCS does. SSC. REDD Plus. So according to a recent report, only a small number of tropical forest carbon offset projects under the REDD Plus have achieved significant cuts in deforestation. So let's understand the concept of REDD Plus. So what is REDD Plus? It was developed by the UNFCCC framework, and what exactly it is? It stands for reducing emissions from deforestation. So if you do not cut trees, it will reduce the emissions, because they will be absorbing these emissions, carbon emissions, and forest degradation in developing countries, right? So that was reduced emissions. So basically it was about land usage change, right? So in the light of the development that was happening in most of the developing countries, the areas dominated by trees were degraded and used for setting up industries or for setting up some other projects. So this was an attempt to show that it is very essential that we follow certain policy that would help in reducing emission. So India, in fact, also give this strategy that perhaps it is not just enough to reduce emission through the deforestation, but we also need to have a positive mindset to it. So the plus here stands for additional forest-related activities that protect the climate and sustainable management of forest and the conservation of forest carbon stock. In fact, India has launched the CAMPA initiative, right? That is basically compensatory management of forest produce in a way to offset everything, right? Offset the forests that have been used for any sort of developmental activities. So under it, the developing countries can receive result-based payments for emission reduction when they reduce deforestation, a very significant carbon payment mechanism, then it is part of the Paris Agreement as well. Next is Greenhouse Gas Bulletin by WMO. The World Meteorological Organization WMO has released its 21st Greenhouse Gas Bulletin detailing the status of the greenhouse gases. And what are the key highlights? First is that the carbon dioxide levels are on record high. Atmospheric CO2 reached 4 to 3.9 ppm in 2024, and it is up from 3.5 ppm parts per million from 2023. That is the largest annual increase since records began in 1957. So it's a significant development. Second, 2024 was the warmest year with global temperature 1.55 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels, breaching the 1.5 degree Celsius Paris Agreement threshold for the first time. So not only the CO2 levels have increased, but it has also been accompanied by significant increase in the temperature as well. So this in a way directly show the correlation. Third, the radiative forcing or the climate forcing, which includes the long-lived greenhouse gases like CO2, etc., have increased by a significant amount of 54%. And apart from that, other greenhouse gases have also increased, such as methane and nitrous oxide, above the pre-industrial levels. Time Rondeau crystal. Again, this is a very technical topic, so just understand the basics because it requires a significant understanding of physics to completely grasp this topic, right? So why this was in news? Because scientists have discovered a new phase of matter. So new phases of matter can be different, but this is a completely new phase of matter called Time Rondeau crystal. So what exactly is Time Rondeau crystal? It is a state of matter, and it exhibits a unique mix of order and disorder over time. It is not over space, but it is over time. Unlike normal crystals, which have a repeating pattern in space, this crystal shows a pattern in time. That is why it is very significant. Its behavior is partly ordered and partly random, not repeating exactly like traditional time crystals. Then this phase has been observed in quantum systems, such as the nuclear spins in diamonds under controlled experimental conditions. Now, what is the significance of this? It is very much important, or it can have a very significant impact with respect to increasing the quantum computing ways, because they work in qubits and application in time sensitive technologies, right? So this is a very important development, and more articles will come on this so we can have more clarity, right? Then Prussian blue capsule. So India has provided the crucial Prussian blue capsule to which country? To Indonesia, to help mitigate the effects of cesium-137. So cesium-137 contamination is essentially CS-137 is a radioactive isotope produced during nuclear fission, not fusion, and used in the medical devices and industrial gauges. Its exposure can cause significant health issues like burns, acute radiation sickness, and even death. Right, so Indonesian government has requested India to provide for CS-137. So India has, provide the blue capsules. So India has provided the Prussian blue capsule to help it with the CS-137 radiation issues. So what exactly is Prussian blue capsule? So it works by trapping the radioactive cesium and thallium in the intestine, preventing their absorption in the body, and it helps in eliminating these material from the body. It reduces radiation exposure and limits the potential health damage. So what is important from the perspective is that you understand that what is the use case of this and which country has sought help from India regarding this, and also about CS-137, what exactly it is. The last news is about Henley Passport Index, and why it was in news? Because India's passport rank has slipped to 85th rank. Earlier it was, I think, around 80th, and in the year 2025, in fact, a lot of countries also have seen a decline, but Singapore continues to be in the first or the strongest passport in the world. So what is Henley Passports Index? It is released by Henley and Partners, a global leader in residence and citizenship planning. Then it has taken this data from IATA, that is International Air Transport Association, that is IATA. And what is the significance of having a strong passport? Because the stronger the passport, the stronger the countries the holders can enter without having a specific visa. For example, Singapore citizens can have access to countries, 195 countries without any visa. So this significantly increases the mobility or international mobility of the citizens, and it also denotes confidence in the way they conduct themselves, right? So again, a very important development here. So this is all about today's news discussion. I hope this was useful to you. So that is all from my side. All the best.